it turns out that the thesis number 2 is coming out, and it'll be out by the, I think, the 23rd of November. So we're going to do the launch on the 27th. I've sent you.
I've accepted.
Oh, well done. I know.
That's
right. Yes, good. So we now have a new person who's an old person who's a new person back with us, and so we're just going to go around the table quickly. I know. You can make it up, it's okay.
Yeah.
So you just came back from
last night that ended badly.
Yes, it did actually. That's very funny.
Oh, me. Hi. I'm Jakub. I graduated from MA. Yeah.
You have to stop saying that now. You're a PhD person.
And now I'm a PhD person. Yeah, I need to start doing that. I need to start doing many things like research. No, I'm joking. I'm doing it. Right now, as much as my work practice deals with photography, video, performance, even, and writing, right now I'm looking into translation. Benjamin.
Oh, great.
So I'm looking into him as a first thing to start off, to kick in something, and yeah.
Do you know Carol Jacobs' work on Benjamin translation?
Yes, she bounced off somewhere there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's very good. Normally I don't suggest secondaries on major writers, but her work is quite good. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Kate, and this week I'm thinking about drama and dollar signs. I'm really glad we're looking at identity and difference again this week. So I'm giving a paper in Dallas next week. So
In Dallas?
Here.
On Heidegger? Wow, I want to be there. Bloody hell, how did you manage to pull that one off?
Well, you had a call for papers, and I sent them a little thing.
Did they know that you're going to be talking about Dasein?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And they said, it looks exciting.
Wow.
So,
Is Sandy Stone there still?
I don't know.
Do you know who Sandy
I
Stone
don't know a
is?
soul.
Have you ever been there before?
But somebody Rockham. David Rockham?
Great,
Performance
okay.
philosophy guy.
You must bone up on this, as they say.
Yeah.
But have you ever been to Dallas before?
No.
Okay.
No. The only thing I know that I must see at Dallas is the grassy knoll.
The one thing you must bring back, though, is a Stetson hat.
Okay.
You can't get anything better than a Stetson hat in Dallas. Or a gun, I guess. But
my name is Laura, and I'm still at the notions of event. And I suppose what I was thinking, since we were asked this week, I'd say, well, I suppose what I was thinking in relation to this bit was, because, well, just to recall, like, the kind of Deleuzean event, how that relates to the notion of impersonal, in contrast to event, Heidegger's event, how that relates to appropriation, or like Lyotard's dispossession, how it's well, the not ownership. So these aren't the same events, but just this. I was thinking at the moment, I was sort of thinking about that, but also like with this book, and particularly with my reading it, kind of over the summer, I'm getting a bit confused with my infinites and finitudes and finites and everything. So I ended up with Paracisi.
Oh, you're looking at Parisi's book, yeah.
Yeah, well, so
Yeah,
the
Luciano's
infinite
book.
in that as an
Right.
abstract infinite, in contrast to kind of in contrast to Deleuze's aeon, where it's the asymmetric doesn't seem to relate to this infinite that's an extension in a different sense. So, so I just wanted to,
Okay.
to really like struggle a bit more with this.
Well, this is the place to do it. Come over the place. That's good. Excellent. Thank you.
I am Mattia. I must say I'm not very far from what Laura just described at the moment.
It's a disease.
I am, yes. I am struggling to put in focus.
That's right. Don't you say it too, Joe, right?
To put in focus something that was a bit hazy before in my research. And I was thinking of temporality, the way time flows according to
Come on in. Oh, I cannot believe it. Umar.
Yeah.
I guess it's not possible to do it now.
Okay.
Can you come back tomorrow morning?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll arrange something.
What time will you be there?
I'll send you an email.
Okay, I will be here.
Okay.
Really? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
He's there to fix my computer. We've missed each other for 3 weeks. Okay. Anyway. Go on. Sorry.
That's right. It was time temporalities. Anyway, it was still too general. And progressively, especially by reading Media Soon recently, after Finitude, this is why it's plugging into Lauren, I realized that the notion and I feel problem of possibility is a very important thing passage for me at the moment. What does it mean, possibility? Media Soon wants to make it absolute. I am more inclined to keep it as something that is open, but it's what separates infinity and finitude, especially from this link of Wittgenstein.
We may have to take a look at speculative realism in this class.
But Media Soon is a wonderful book. I mean, there are issues one doesn't agree with, but it's a fantastic, rigorous and clear text.
Great.
And very challenging. It's very nice.
Good.
It's joy to read.
God.
It's short.
Yeah, that's
for me.
That's right. That's right. I'm gonna say. Joe.
Hi everybody, I'm Jo. Just been accepted onto the PhD course, or whatever you might
Yeah,
call it.
program.
My working idea is called pedagogy of objects. But I think that's changing.
Already?
Well,
Well
it's
done.
going to change, I know it is. But
Good.
So,
Can you give people a little bit of a background about what you are and who you do?
I
What you do and who
did
you are?
just finished MA Art Practice and Education here in September, and my research was looking at ways an artist teacher works with students in a classroom or in an art room.
And how old are your students, Marla?
They're between 11 and 18. So I was looking at how those two things, entities, interact in classroom situations, and looking at the ways objects might also inform or teach or provide something else to that kind of situation.
Great. Good. And you had a very interesting piece in the show, in the MA final show. Yeah. I don't know if people saw it. It was in the, whatever that room's now called.
PS1 now?
Yeah, PS1.
Refectory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm second year PhD, and
And
working.
the name?
Oh, Grace, sorry. I was just assuming everyone knows. And this couple of past weeks I've been working on a piece of work that's based on an image from the T.G. Hamilton archive, which I visited in July, where ectoplasm, which is the spirit or the residue of the spirit of a dead person that's manifested through any available orifice of a female medium, but also male mediums on occasion. And
What occasions are those?
Franz Kliski, he produced ectoplasm. He's the main kind of male medium that I've come across now. He was a Polish medium, and he used to also produce. I don't know why I looked at you.
That's right. Do you produce ectoplasm?
Oh yeah, that
Yes.
Let's call it.
And he produced like wax molds of the spirits. They supposedly used to kind of dip their fingers into a wax that was left in the corner of a room as well. But this week, in terms of my practice, I've been working from a photograph that is when the ectoplasm in a specific seance took the form of a scarf, like a very garish kind of awful scarf, which covered the entire head of the medium. So it almost looks like they've been kind of gagged or completely beheaded in some way. So I've been kind of restaging that image with as a series of using just disgusting scarves on different patterns and playing around with the background kind of being black and white, so it doesn't have any colour, and then really kind of focusing on the lightness of this kind of ectoplasm scarf. and it's called Supernormal Scarves, which I find
Fantastic.
So that's what I've been doing this week.
That's great. Good. At some point, can we see a bit of it? We put some in the room? Maybe
Yes, yeah.
We could exchange that last year's painting
Yes,
things?
yeah. I'm playing around with them, so they'll be kind of life size because it's based on using myself. So it's seated in kind of a Victoriana setting, which is based on the room that they kind of happened in. And I'm looking at putting it between very thick kind of pieces of perspex, and it's so that it stands, because it kind of plays around with the idea of the seance cabinet and the sizings that they used to use. As well as a lot of kind of early magic tricks, the proportions of the boxes that women used to vanish in. So I'm just playing around.
That's fantastic. That women used to vanish in is also quite an interesting just clip. What you're saying.
Women.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm Dane. I'm interested in undecipherable propositions and developing the methodology of dealing with time with regards to real-time systems, specifically digital arts and instantaneous feedback. I'm at the moment looking at working with telematics, strange loops, in just developing the methodology for.
So you and Mattia would have something in common about
Yes.
the feedback. And you and Jakob would have something in common with respect to, because a lot of your work was on Benjamin. You were looking at the way in which he was interpreting Baudelaire. So that's, I know you didn't mention that, but I just
And
wanted to that scene.
I've got to focus in digital arts, mostly video, sound, but with focus on sequences and missing temporality, anticlimaxes, that sort of thing.
Great, good, excellent. So, and what's your most recent work you've done? What color?
No color.
No color. And the color of the thing that you presented for the thesis?
Gray.
Gray. And it's called The Unending Series, right? And it's quite a beautiful, it's a very poetic piece, in fact. Yeah, it's great. You'll see it in 2 weeks. Good.
Hello, I'm Mark. I'm missing Lou Reed as well. His little machine is at 4 sides of industrial guitar note. I have, as I say, Mattia and Lauren on the way in. I've got a DVD and a CD of a version where they play it on acoustic instruments. Is he grinding away on violins and cellos and some German people? It's really interesting. On the way, I'm really interested in this book now. This all times have changed. The dawn must be turning his grave.
That's right. Breathe slowly, quietly.
So I was reading this on the train coming in this morning, and yeah, I'm really liking it. That's what we've only had it a year, haven't we? We started this a year. It's really beginning to open up. So.
Lauren, you are contagious. Yeah. It's funny, I refused to read Heidegger. In fact, the only German I would read was Marx, and it was basically because of the whole relationship between being Jewish and the Holocaust, and I wouldn't read anything in German, I wouldn't do it. And I realized, okay, spot the flaw. So then I started reading, and I was like, damn it, I like it. You know, exactly, my heart goes to, yeah.
Andre, I'm in the MA, working on intersections between collaboration, curation, and artists.
You are so much more interesting than that I wouldn't even know what that looks like. Let's try it again. Try, why don't you explain that SAP thing you're doing then, in terms of the archival stuff?
So the SAP thing is trying to collate all of the facilities around Biohead in a way that is accessible. Started by looking at slide ruler charts, kind of spinning ones. They're proving to be a bit of a pain in terms of developing as an app. So at the moment I've just registered this morning with the institute, so I'm technically a staff member.
So you can go to this meeting.
No, not yet. I'm not yet. So first port of call is collating all the information across the whole of the institution of what we have, where it is, and what it is. And
But you're doing it with this weird app. This is the thing.
well, this is what I'm trying to work towards, is creating this kind of slide rule or spinning chart thing that you can kind of access things. I don't know how we get to that point.
Okay.
Investigating.
There are a couple people in this room. You in particular, I think, would be interested in this kind of weird app stuff.
I was curious what kind of information are you collating?
So it's for students if they
Bank accounts.
yeah maiden names.
That's right. That's right. Passwords.
Yeah, it's a point where they can kind of find out if you wanted to do printing and 3D printing, where across the facility or where across the institution there might be facilities of some kind of 3D printing. So in theory it should show you kind of building, room, contact name, emails and things like that, but it's in its infancy at the moment.
Good.
I'm Andrew. I'm the Whitney Fellow, and today I purchased some marble and cut some metal.
Wow.
That's
great. And how big was the marble?
It's only.
First I thought you meant a marble.
No, it's like 2 pieces with sort of size. Bianco Carrara.
And did you touch it?
Not yet. It's getting transported.
Oh.
So I'll
Wow.
be with it for a while. It's it.
That's great. Do you know what it looks like on any level?
Looks like.
I mean, what color?
It's a whitish colour with like a greyish vein running through it.
And how did you select it?
I've just asked them to cut me 2 pieces.
And so you didn't really, it just whatever the pieces were.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of it just kind of turning up and being like, oh.
Okay, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And how was MIT?
It was,
Boring.
yeah, a bit too technology people, but the centre's good.
You
I'm
didn't
not
like
going to
the
say anything with cameras on.
Oh,
Yeah.
Center's fantastic, actually.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I've got a nice Solid floor piece.
Yeah, that's true.
Which I just sat in for a day.
Yeah, that's nice.
Did some work. Enjoyed the colours.
Yeah, good.
That was pretty much it.
Okay, thanks.
Hi,
Yay.
I'm Francesco. I'm Peter. And I do apologize for not coming the last couple of times.
I'm glad you're here
And
now.
apologize in advance for not coming next time.
That's right.
Because I'm going to Madrid for a festival / show / performance.
Excellent. Are you in it?
Yeah.
Well, that's probably can't miss it then.
So, yeah, I'll be there for a few days.
Excellent.
And yeah, as a painter lately, I'm thinking about the concepts of invisible body. And well, I was working on a canvas, and at some point I started cutting the canvas and rolling it around the stretch outs, and it became sort of like, it wasn't a painting anymore. It became like just a stretch out with canvas rolled around. And I stuck a piece of wood inside, and which became sort of in the middle of the piece. And so I started thinking about abstract work as a pedestal. Abstract as structures, pedestal structures for a meaning that is not there, which is the invisible body. So I don't know, I'm a bit confused, but I'm thinking about this later.
Good.
You know, Björnman's only pedestal of the
Interesting
board.
No.
He made a pedestal, it's somewhere in France, but it's upside down, and it's titled the pedestal of the board. So,
Oh, okay.
well,
Yeah.
just take that out.
Yeah, it's
the
good.
film.
And also, who's the guy that did the canvas with the slashes?
Fontana.
Fontana, Luciano.
Yeah, I know this one.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Ready to begin? Ready to rock and roll here? Okay. I just want to give I thought we had a very thorough meeting last week. How are they coming on? Are they online now? Who do I look at? Yes, excellent. And also, I'd like to say that Grace, thanks to both Dane and Grace, Grace has gotten Article Press finally online too, where you can actually buy the books. It's a miracle. That's like all I can say.
I sold myself.
You sold yourself.
In the end, that
Well
was the way
done. I'm sorry about that.
It was a bad joke that went completely flat with everyone.
No, I got it.
Thanks.
Fine. Sad, isn't it? Anyway, okay. So one of the things I thought would be important to do as we move into this next sort of arena around the groundless ground scenario is to really get a sense of what it is, or why it is, rather, that why it is that foundations are important anyway. Like, what is it about this obsession about needing a ground, not needing a ground? Yes, there's a ground. No, we don't want a ground. You know, the groundless grounds and so on and so forth. So I just want to preface that by reminding you about problems of epistemology and method and sort of aesthetics and how that kind of fits together. So the first thing to say is that in sort of very horrifically general terms, and we're not going to spend time on it in this seminar at the moment anyway. I mean, we can always circle back to it. But the work that argues, or the metaphysics that argues that the universal is the criteria around which something can be understood, is where this work is taking its departure. So, in other words, the notion of the universal, and the reason people have become, or one of the reasons people are so confounded and also attracted to it, is that it provides a way in which one can appropriate knowledge as something other than one's opinion. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is so that the work that one produces, again, is something other than just was good because you happen to be standing there at that time and that's why it works. That it works, it doesn't necessarily have to work everywhere at any time. So it's not that form of the universal, but it has to in some way create a something, we're going to leave it at that, some kind of something that is able to withstand one moment and go into moment two. It's able to kind of repeat itself. Because if it can only withstand its own self for the millisecond it's made, then it won't be able to be anything, it won't emerge beyond one's opinion, one's good idea, one's whim, something like that. So the idea that you can capture a fleeting something and say that that fleeting something is important, matters, makes matter, is where we're headed. We're not trying to say that whimsicality isn't important or spontaneity isn't important or something like that. By we, I mean this group of us and the stuff we're doing here. So it was a challenge against the universal concept. And so if you have a problem or you can't recall what is meant by universal concept, I can do, sort of a sharp, short history of that. So just do something like nod or fall asleep or go like this. Okay. Yes? Oh, okay. Okay. The short, sharp scenario is that you have to understand, you have to figure out what is it about, let's say, we're just going to put it like this, what is it about the work that you're doing, or that any artist is doing, that anyone is doing? What is it about knowledge when it's not an opinion? How does it become more steadfast when it's not, and anyway, what's wrong with just having an opinion? What's the problem with opinion? What comes to mind immediately is Russell Brand, I think, and his recent, spouting about revolution and the ability not to want to vote and so on and so forth. It's like, again, with leaders like that, you just want to throw yourself over the bridge. Anyway, so the idea of why opinions are needing to have some kind of substance to them in order for them to be rigorous and make sense. Literally, not just make sense at the level of I like it and I'm in power, or I like it and I have a lot of money, so that's just tough for you, but makes sense in a kind of positional way. Now, with Hegel, we have we're using him as a straw dog. We're using him as the point of departure. So I'm using him in slightly a caricature way. So I do hope that you will read Science of Logic, you will read the Phenomenology, and we'll try and get into this, or you'll come to the MA classes where we're going through this in detail. But But what basically you need to get a sense of is that either there's a logic that holds for everything. It contains the whole of the universe. It contains the whole of it contains the totality. And there have been discussions for centuries as to whether this totality is open or closed. But there's never a question about the totality itself until basically you start dealing with people that go from Kant, they sort of jump over jump over Hegel and get into Heidegger. What Heidegger suggests is the main, no, let me start again. With Hegel, the brilliant part about Hegel that is still active today in everyone's work is the fact that identity, the meaning of something, always has nothing as its feature, as its starting point. That's Hegel basically makes the claim that negation, that nothing, that no thing, that nothing is at the very start. If you have to start with somewhere, and you have to start with somewhere, like the yellow brick road, you have to start where you are. You start where you're going to start. You start where you are. You start right here. That's where you start. You start at the here, and the here is unmediated. It's immediate. Stroke like not, stroke mediated, not mediated. So the where you start right here is the is. You start right where you are, and that's what you know is at least true, even if it's true for this tight little moment, this little intensity moment. You start right here. And what Hegel argues is the here that you start with, the here stroke now, is a no thing. And it can't be intelligible until you apply intuition to it. And and intuition then sublates the no here, or the no where, or the now where, the now here, nowhere, the no thing, nothing. It sublates it and creates a fuller form of intuition, that is to say the universal concept of intuition, which allows one to make some immediate comments on things. But knowing that the core, to the degree to which there is a core, and of course there's not really a core, but let's say the here, right here, has nothing in it. It doesn't start, you don't start with something, you start with nothing. Okay, so this is the first key. And not to go through all of the Hegelian moves, but basically, eventually, through a series of ways that he makes the argument, knowledge becomes the highest version of all these processes of sublation, which then comes back around and grounds the entire paradigm. So knowledge itself, which it starts with the here, it's sublated by intuition, then against that is sense certainty, and against that is perception, and against that is understanding, and against that is the knowledge, and then it starts all again. Am I going too fast? Is this okay? You're getting this? Okay, good. All right, so the wholeness, the fullness of this entity, knowledge, you can't divide it out. You can't take out nothing from knowledge. Like the irrational, the non-rational, the non-thought, the unthought is not on the other side of knowledge. It's not opposed to knowledge. It is knowledge. It's part of this knowledge. It's a very powerful argument. And the criticism that Heidegger launches against this is he says the problem is that it basically ends up taking as a given what it's trying to prove, inasmuch as it says that the way you create a named something, the way something gets its name, the way something gets its meaning, name equals meaning here, the way something is understood, is communicated, is mediated, the way it gets to come in its ectoplasmic moment. Okay, I'm totally into the ectoplasm. The way it comes to the table, as it were, through the orifices or whatever. I mean, the way it manifests itself it requires a different understanding of where this nothing plays a role. So what Heidegger says, he opens up his identity and difference, which I asked you to take a look at. And he basically has the famous expression, which you know, maybe when you first start reading Heidegger, you think, wow, you know, he says, you know, A equals A. And it's just like, right, okay, that's just very profound. Everyone nods very sagely is. You know, and what he basically is saying here is that in the equation, A equals A, he's saying that what that means, what it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean, I don't know where my pens are going. When you have A equals A, you have A equals A. When you have this, in a dialectical positioning that he's calling it, it would mean that A is this one and this one is here, and that's why you can say that they're identical. They match, they're point for point the same. You could even say not A, because the not A could be on the other side of A, could be a point for point on it. And Heidegger says that's the wrong picture here. The picture you need to start thinking about is how does this equal sign create an attraction? So that this thing here, let's call it an apple, and this thing here, another apple, are linked, belong to each other. So he says that actually the first step of identity is that there's a belonging. What makes this thing stick with that thing is that they belong together. Now, you might want to get into a whole study on what makes something belong. What is it that creates this attraction? What is it that makes one into this kind of moment where you have the A rushing to the other A, and you also have them kept apart somehow? So the belonging, says Heidegger, is that on the one hand, this A and this A, they come together. But on the other hand, they don't come so far together that they're on top of each other, in which case they just have it like this, and then you wouldn't have an identity. You just have that's all you'd have. Okay, so what he says here is that what one needs to think through is, first of all, how these guys belong to each other and how they don't belong to each other. How they are able, the same thing, to be apart. So he starts writing in his Identity and Difference, and we'll go through it in a minute, where he starts saying, you need to understand how something both belongs and at the same time longs to be. That there's this relation between belonging, being pulled together, and wanting to be, left alone. I want to be alone, said a famous actress. Anybody know who said that? Greta Garbo, people. Anybody know who Greta Garbo is? Don't even tell me you don't know who this is. You don't know who Greta Garbo is?
I probably don't know, I'm sure you will.
I mean, honestly.
At least I said I didn't know, instead
Well,
of being one.
that doesn't make me feel better.
Okay, I know, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I now feel better. Okay, so Greta Garbo, great turbans. Just wear fantastic turbans. Anyway, I mean, she was a good, very nice actor. Very fine
Nothing to do with
actress.
acting, but the
No, she was a fine actress, but she really wanted to be left alone. Everybody kept bugging her. Anyway, so A equals A, and then, so they belong, and they also somehow come together, and somehow don't come together. And this is the first step of understanding part A, as it were, of identity. See, one of the problems with the universal version of naming identity is that you can only come up with proper names. You can only come up with the universal. Because anything before that is going to be an abstraction. So as a result, you can really, if you're going to talk about anything that's a part of something, like this, that's both a portion of it and also a part from it, if you're going to talk about, it's always going to be in terms of there's your universal. So it's always going to be in terms of like a pie, let's say. It's all right. So you're going to take a slice out. Here you go. That's your slice, and now we've got, that equals 1/6. I think we have 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. That's 1/6. So you could talk about this in and of itself as 1/6, but what happens if that's not your picture? What happens if your picture doesn't have edges? What happens if we're talking about, for example, I go running off to the universe, the galaxies? Where's the edge of the galaxy? The edge of the galaxy is exactly where it ends, but there's nothing beyond it. The edge of the galaxy is fully what it is. It's like the marble. The marble doesn't go beyond its marble. It ends at what you might want to say is a sharp edge, but a coastline does the same thing. And these things are called fractals. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Now, so and they're slices. They're slices of moments. What Heidegger's positioning does is it starts to lend itself to understanding something around intensity. Something the way in which something begins to make matter because there's some kind of energy formation or no energy formation. But it's not required to deal with contradiction in the same way that a Hegelian move is requiring. So there's a bit more play involved. Now, again, what is going to be argued in the groundless grounds thing, and what argued, again, we get back to, are we really just between Kant and Hegel? Always. Because this is like the same old, same old. Hegel says there's one reality, and there's one way of understanding reality. There's no such thing as virtual reality. Virtual reality is all part of reality. There's a reality, it's all that there is, and all that there's not, taken together, that's the whole picture, the whole thing. Kant says there are at least two different logics to understanding the one reality. There's the logic of the dialectical and the mathematically dynamical. So those are, and at the end of the day, or maybe in the middle of it, maybe we just go back to Kant or we just go back to Hegel. And then you have, on the one hand, a move that happens between Wittgenstein, is what Brever's saying, and Heidegger. Both of them, coming from very different directions, argue that there is kind of a third way of looking at this. And the third way requires a notion of belonging, not belonging, A equals A, where the focus is on the equal sign, not on the endpoints. Now, Heidegger is going to develop this, as are all of the Deleuzians that follow the Heideggerian moment, Lyotard, the whole crowd that we will eventually look at. He develops this to end up saying that between A and A, that what creates this he's going to call discourse. So this equal sign is actually the site of discourse. And for Heidegger, he's going to basically say you have little a, we'll just call it little entity, little b, we'll call it b, as I would say, little being, little b being, and big B for Dasein, for the out there, the over there. So before I get into that little step, so any questions about this equal sign? Because this is a fundamental thing that you need to understand about how the equal sign is, in fact, stop thinking about it as parallel bars. Think about it as a discursive thing that has an opening.
It's a question. Because reading it yesterday, I sort of got more confused than I thought I.
Isn't it exciting? How many years have you been reading this?
Yeah, exactly. Would it be right to say that Heidegger first criticizes the understanding of the equal sign as a bridge, to say this is that, because that, if it's a bridge, then it stays in between the this and the that, and it will never be reachable. So there will be always something that keeps moving apart. And what he introduces instead focusing on the relation rather than the entities, is a dynamic was a circulation between the two.
Yes.
It is always, it is never rest.
Yes, but it's not this like crazy circulation. There's a logic to the circulation.
Yes,
It's not just
all the circulation is precisely the logic is trying to bring.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. But, I mean, it's not quite a feedback loop, if that's what you're suggesting.
No. I always see the problem that the big B and small b means from having read this first in Italian years ago. The translation is entirely different, and I can't get away from that because big B would be the infinity of the verb to be. So it would be BE only. And then the small b is being, so it's a space and time instance of an infinity that doesn't have any determination. So that's where
But that's not, I don't think that is necessarily contradicting.
No, but it brings in this idea of something undetermined and something determined. And therefore I see the circulation between these two.
Okay.
This is why I can say, I don't see any contradiction between the two. Or
Oh, I see, right, yeah. Well, let me just suggest that we don't think of this as a dynamic, but don't think of this as anything that can keep going in a flow, because it's discursive. So this equal sign is itself creating an energy between these 2 points that make them the same, that make them belong together. So that's the first thing. So this is what Leotard is going to name the zero. So this is where zero is no longer going to look like this. It's going to look like that. That's going to be the zero. Aren't you glad you joined? Small eye. That's right. Okay. So try it again. So this connection, this is also going to point out the fact that there's no in between. That's why whenever you've mentioned in between, I've always gone pale and said no in between. You might want to call this transspatial. You might want to call it something else, but it's not in between anything. It's the wrong picture. Now, the reason one has a picture like that is because in the Hegelian move, or in, let's say, the move that is based on contradiction, you start with a here. I'm here. Now, I'm not going to throw anything at you today. Sorry, I threw some things at Dane last night. I threw that book at him, actually. Sorry.
Refer it back.
Sorry, don't do that. Quiet. Anyway, so if you're here, here I am, here, Johnny is here, this is Johnny here, right here. Now how do I get out of here? If I move from here to where Francesco's sitting, here, what's happened to here? It's moved with me, right? So I can't get out of here. I can go everywhere, but I can't get out of here. If I want to go over there where Samira is, and I actually went over there, I would be here. I would still be here. I can't get out of here. This is the Hegelian tragedy. You know, you're here, and you're here, but you do get out of here, right? I mean, you just, I feel like I'm talking about Scooby-Doo at this point. Scooby, how do we get out of here?
Because it's ground, like Hegelian equals grounded.
Yeah.
Playing the ground, putting the ground there.
The ground becomes the here, or the no thing, because the here is this thing that doesn't exist unless it's being mediated. You can't draw on it. So the there, the Dasein, you never can get to, because, and not in the Hegelian world, because you're here. And like I was saying before, that's why I so love those maps, the You Are Here maps. You know, I just find them so immensely hilarious. Every time, I mean, I come back from Birmingham to London, I'm standing in front of the bus map, You Are Here. It's like, yes. I'm in Japan, You Are Here. Yes, I'm never out of here. You know, so it's here, here, here. How do you get out of here? Well, in the Hegelian move, there's a sublation that's required. There's a way, there's a mediation that's required. There's a process that begins to shape the getting out of here. And in getting out of here, you're actually never in the here. The minute you approach here, it's gone. The minute you approach the present, it goes away. So Zizek's arguments, for example, are always this, inability to get to your object of desire. And if you get there in some way, it's conceivable that you get there. If you do get there, then you don't want to be there, because the minute you're there, it's no longer not possible. I mean, it's no longer impossible. It's now possible, and therefore you're no longer here. You get that? You get that kind of insanity of Zizek, but anyway. Hence, Zizek also argues that heterosexuality is impossible, because you can't get there. I digress. Anyway, sorry, I'm in my anti-Slavoj Zizek impersonation of him.
Where does the plurality of worlds fit into? Is this sort of fit in, or is that something completely separate?
The plurality of worlds.
Yeah.
Meaning, how do you mean that?
What is it? David Lewis who wrote on, what's it? I don't know how you say it. Is that the many worlds?
Well, Habermas wrote on the communicative worlds. So, with the argument being that you have all these different worlds. You're in I don't know, the young world, the rock world, the philosophy world, and then these worlds overflow. They connect like that. That's a different diagram. That's a different scenario. Yeah. And this would not be a diagram that Hegel, Heidegger, or any of those people would ever think of using, because it's always taking as a given what you're trying to prove. So the kind of Habermasian move that happens, who's the main poobah of this world, of that kind of position, Jürgen Habermas, who's very brilliant. I mean, his whole arguments around legitimation crisis are all about how these worlds are established. He takes these worlds as read, and there is something to be said about it, because a lot of times it's a politicizing of the world, right? So the world is created hegemonically, or it's created somehow in the Muslim world, or I don't know, the political, whatever the world is, those kind of things called the world, and we understand worlds in that way. Yeah. But it tends to mean these kind of they have these kind of sealed ridges that then overlap, and then you can have like 5 levels of oppression. I mean, a lot of the left was, consumed by this. So you had, if you were female, black, Jewish, gay, disabled, you had like 5 oppressions you could deal with. Immediate working class, forgot about that one. You could be like 6 oppressions worse off than someone that was a white male doing something, because you had these different worlds that you were, and it's a very specific worldview. So if you have the view that reality is just one reality, and that there are different nuances that happen, then you also run the risk of losing sight of the political. So the one sort of overemphasizes the political, the other one overemphasizes the aesthetic, and it's a negotiation that needs to happen. Now what's happening with Heidegger is he's basically ignoring that, both of those issues. And he's trying to say, actually, let's just get down to the building block of naming, of calling something what it is, and see where that takes us. Now, it may take us down a rough and rocky path to fascism. It may take us down a rough and rocky path to understanding painting. I wouldn't be drawing you on this if I actually thought it was taking us to fascism, I have to say. But you might see it otherwise. So anyway, questions so far? Is that, yeah, you have a question? No, you look like you have a question.
I was wondering about the equal sign, but this rewinded a bit.
Okay, we can go back to the equal sign. Let me just say then, before we do go back to the equal sign, that if you can't get out of here, and that the way in which one begins to understand change is precisely by understanding that here is the now. It's a very particular temporal sense. The now time is temporally, this instant now, as we can see it. We're not dreaming it. It's the awake chronos of the now. It's chronological time. So there's an immediate thing that already that form of time is being put into the equation. Now, what Heidegger wants to do is suggest that in creating this kind of bridging action, it turns out that the so-called endpoints, we're going to put them as endpoints for the moment, just for the moment, because he doesn't really see this as an endpoint, but just so you can get through this, so you can get what's going on. This kind of endpoint scenario where you have little b being and big B being, that when you think out there, that relationship between here and there, this is what we're talking about, is the field or the discourse. This is where we're going. So that creates an environment. Now, in the Einsteinian move, he's going to drop the two so-called endpoints. There is no, you don't have to have any observational moment going on. It doesn't require an observation. This requires an entity. This requires some kind of intention, some kind of consciousness, some kind of something that's involved. Whereas for Einstein and most of the people that are dealing with quanta and quantum, well, Einstein's always problematic on the quanta, but anyway, the point is that anybody that's dealing in this kind of like relativity movement doesn't require intentionality. And if it doesn't require intentionality, that's a different way of talking about universality without creating a totality. See, the next problem is, if there's consciousness in it, if there's totality in it, if there's cognition in it, does that kind of muddy it? Does that mean that it doesn't hold? So that if I'm not cognating it, but somebody else is cognating it, does that mean it's true or not true? So what Einstein wants to get away from, what Heidegger wants to get away from, what they all want to get away from, is that you actually need to have been in the forest to know that the tree fell on you. Or it fell, not on you, it fell. So you don't really need to be in the forest to know this fact. You know, so you need to be, you know, you don't require observation. Now there's big arguments about it. Bergson, his argument around time and memory and duration requires some form of observational platform. Requires some kind of moment that you're moving around. And there's somebody who's right, actually Ali Hagen, who did sit in here for a time. He's got a piece in the thesis, which is arguing on the Melissu position around finitude, or after finitude. He's arguing against it, but he's arguing from a mysticism point of view. So he's arguing about profound consciousness, like the profound notion of having an intentionality. And so he's criticizing Melissu from a completely different other end, not from a secular end, but from this other kind of consciousness thing. Anyway, that probably is too confusing. Now, what Heidegger goes on to say, papers. So what Heidegger goes on to say here, you've got in your mind, now we'll open the book so you can actually read it and see that this is basically a caricature. But so I drew the little b being as an entity and the big B being Dasein, the there, as big, so just to differentiate it. And that what keeps these together and apart is, at this moment, this so-called equal sign, or the discursive. But in fact, it's not, do you still say something? No. So it's not set up in this way. It's actually more, see, the question is, why does that not collapse? Why is it that this B doesn't get sucked into Dasein? I mean, it doesn't get sucked in. How come it doesn't get sucked in? What's the logic behind it? What's the argument? What is it that, how come this doesn't collapse into how come there is this ability to do this apart together? And what Heidegger, we'll see how he argues it, but it's a long, complex argument around the question of difference and how difference enters into this picture. So it's identity and difference. And identity and difference, the difference is the thing that is part of the identity. So first you start off with this A equals A, or B equals B in this case, and you see how it's big B, little b, so they don't have to be the same size to be belonging. They don't have to be the same size to be equal. So you could have, you know, tree and, you know, person or something. They could belong, you know, person and their dog. You could belong together. You have this form of identity, but that's still not identity. You have to figure out how this doesn't collapse onto itself. So we know that belonging has something to do with, on the one hand, this staying together, and on the other hand, staying apart, belonging, wanting to be. Okay. On the other hand, it's like, I've explained this once before, and it's only a description, so it's not really a proper argument. For those of you that are strong swimmers, do we have any strong swimmers in here?
It's been for ages.
You have been swimming?
Yeah. My father forced me for 10 years.
He forced you for 12 years, but so
I
you...
didn't really like it.
Okay.
But it was good though.
Okay, great. Okay, you ever been in a riptide?
I know that.
Do you know an undertow? You've been in one. How do you get out of it?
You have to swim across it
Yeah,
instead of against it.
yeah, or even toward it, right? If you see the shore, and this is like, you know, not only are we learning about Heidegger, but we're now also learning how to get out of a riptide in case you're in one. If you are seeing the shore, now the logic of this is about as logical as punching a shark in the nose when it's coming at you, okay? So I want you to know that also is very helpful information, and like, you know, it's a good way to lose part of your arm. But anyway, but technically speaking, you see the shore, and if you're being pulled out to sea through what's called a riptide or an undertow or whatever they call it over here, this thing that pulls you this way, in order for you to get out of it, you've got to swim diagonal. So actually what Heidegger is setting up here is a diagonal relationship. So that the being goes like so, against, so you're not being, as you're moving this way, you're being pulled this way, but you're not actually going into Dasein, and never will if you can continue going in this direction. You're fighting like this, that's going like that. Now, if you can't do that, and it's not about, again, it's not about the attention per se, that's why this is a kind of crummy example, but if you can't pull yourself across, then this whole thing collapses. The main key here for this argument so far, the main thing to think about is what is it that creates the belonging? That's just the basic position. That's where he's starting from. Now, does everybody have identity difference? Does anybody have identity? Okay, good. Let me just pull up mine. So I would like to go on the Dropbox. Are you part of the Dropbox? You are?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if everybody can look on. Can you look on? Okay. Sorry about this. Here. Okay. All right, taking longer than I thought. Take a printout of it. Well done. Okay. What's that? You got it. You got it. Oh,
That's
wait.
just me dairy being to myself.
This is the 7-year-old or the?
This is like the 80-year-old.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, this is taking longer than I thought. Okay. So in the very beginning, actually, if you get to I think it's page 25. Yeah, no, it's page 15. So this is in Joan Stanbaugh's excellent introduction. And she basically is saying that Heidegger starts with a question, what is thinking concerned with? Now later on you'll see that he's actually asking what is thinking. But the moment Joan Stambaugh in relation to Heidegger is posing the question, what is thinking concerned with, taking as a given that the word thinking, that people are going to at least have a lay sense, they're going to think contemplation or, you know, logic or something like that. Communication, language, what is thinking concerned with, and compares the answer to Hegel. Now, I just say this because we're not going to move it to this, but he says here, or she says here, for both Hegel and Heidegger, thought is concerned with being, but for Hegel, being is absolute thought thinking itself. Now, if you have any questions, if this sentence sounds like gobbledygook, you must say something, because I don't want to leave anybody behind.
What it makes me always think when we get to this point of the absolute thought thinking itself is that through all the process of sublation,
Yeah.
It seems, I'm not saying it is, but it seems very difficult to retain some sort of individuality. If the thought thinking itself is the whole movement of the whole universe historically, looking at Mark as well as looking at me very seriously now. I, as Mattia today, somehow become extremely small if there is still room for me at all. And I know that Hegel keeps it with all the folds of negation and sublation, negation, sublation, but
No, but it's almost like Alice in Wonderland. You're big and you're small at the same time. I mean, the concept called Mattia isn't small. This entity, your essence for Hegel would not be tiny. It's not that you're like lost in this dot of the ocean of, you know, of the movement of knowledge. So try not to conflate two different things. One is a concept. The concept of how knowledge thinks itself. That is, what's the rules of the game with the concept. That's what it's talking about here. And then when you take those rules of the game and you start seeing how everything has concept, then those apply equally to all entities. Do you see that bit? Okay, so you're not really shrinking down Mattia. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Does everybody see this? Okay, so for both Hegel and Heidegger, thought is concerned with being, but for Hegel, being is absolute thought thinking itself. That is to say that knowledge, as the highest form of the absolute, also forms the ground, and therefore nothing exceeds knowledge. Knowledge is both the highest and the highest point and the start of what is. I feel like I should give you a thumbnail, a resume of what we did last night. How do we do? Oh, I wonder, does this work on low odor? Whiteboard marker, great. Okay. I realized only just when I did this, that this is actually a whiteboard. Okay, so if we have, just a quick thing with the Hegel thing. So if we have no thing or nothing, and the no, the now time, and you know that on the other side of the now time, so let's say that we'll just call this no thing. On the other side of this is thing. Right, you get that. This is like, so if you have the piece of paper, as I've shown many times, one side is thing. Don't worry about it. Oh, here, let's use this. Do you need this?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
That's right.
It's that.
Okay. So this side is thing, this side is all that is not thing, and they follow each other, but they're the same. Like if I go like this, no thing doesn't run to catch up with thing. Whatever happens, it happens at the same exact time. So the point, it's a point for point relation. This side and this side, point for point relation. Okay, so for every side of no thing, there's thing. You could call it antithesis here. Oops. So we'll call thesis, just to really break it up. On the other side, there, is thesis. And you could stretch this all the way out, and it would follow, and you could collapse it, and it would follow. So that's the very first point. And in order for that to make any sort of sense, the basic structure is that the thesis, or the antithesis, either one, gets sublated into thesis. That forms synthesis. And the synthesis then comes back around and forms the ground of those 2 points. So antithesis, thesis, or let's say 1, not 1, is the equation we've got there. That for every point of 1, there's a not 1 on the other side. A, not A, that kind of thing. You see that, right? I'm not trying to make you... That this is an abstraction. Before it's made into this fuller picture, these 2 points, when they're not sublated, when they're just sitting there, as that piece of paper, wherever it went, is doing.
Well,
Like
contract fault.
That's what.
Cannot be this.
That's for urban pie.
Mushroom pie.
Yes, okay, so on this thing, which is, it is basically whatever we want it to be. It could be a sales slip. We know it's a sales slip because we know what this looks like, but it could be just something on this side, something on the other side. The reason we know it's a sales slip is we know that if taken together, the whole thing creates sales slip, which gives meaning to these 2 sides. So otherwise, it's just abstraction. So an abstraction, just to be 100% certain, so in your PhDs you don't screw this up, abstraction is when it's not universal. That is to say, when it's not fully, an abstraction basically is like a definition. That is a very important way of putting it. So that's why I can't stand when you put definitions in your essays. And I say, no, I don't care what the Oxford Dictionary says. If you're doing philosophy, you're not going to be, or you could put in what the dictionary says, but it doesn't say anything. It's an abstraction. It's just, where does the list end? Just because the Oxford Dictionary got tired of explaining what something says? No. So abstraction is not the same. So what makes something universal is when what Hegel calls and others concrete, or even it's called a concrete universal, which I think it's like a universal. Okay, any questions so far?
So the abstraction is concrete.
No, the abstraction is not concrete. Like for example, an example would be an abstraction. A model of something is an abstraction. In the olden days, before you came doing proper philosophy and knowing that you had to wear it like clothes or like blood or something like that, you have to have it on you, in you, this kind of thing. A lot of times people would think of theories as something you apply, you put on something. That is bad theory. That's bad ways of thinking. It doesn't work because it's a model. And it's no surprise that most people would get bored with it, or should get bored with it. A lot of people don't get bored with it, actually. So if you apply a label to something, that's not understanding its relationship with theory and practice. The theory and the practice should do the same thing. If they're not doing the same thing, then something's wrong with the theory, not the practice, is usually how the argument goes.
So the artwork to be abstract of the or the
No.
theory?
No. The artwork is not at all, nothing to do with being abstract. It could be abstract if it's being used as a model, but not necessarily.
Yeah.
You're saying yes, but
No, yeah, I can see what
let's try it. So the thesis, antithesis, the one thing gets sublated into the other. And the synthesis, now this so-called coming back around, the various names for this, becoming, immanence, transcendence. Now, this is a shorthand, because some people might also argue that this is negative. This movement, this thing that goes like so, is not really moving anywhere. Just like I could say that if you crunched up the piece of paper, the thesis doesn't run to catch up with the antithesis, or vice versa. It doesn't really move anywhere. But it's got a fluidity to it, pardon me, a dynamic, which doesn't exist in the normal sense. So one could say that that's why it's in process, or that's why it's immanent, transcendent. Okay, now, what Hegel then says, his whole process that goes on, is that you start with nothing. You start with the immediate, the not mediated, immediate, so not mediated. And in order for you to grasp that which is not mediated, you have to put something against that. And what Hegel is arguing is the thing that can go against the not mediated is intuition. So I'm just going to explain this to you very quickly. If you go look at the preface and introduction, preface to scientific cognition in his phenomenology, he goes through this step by step. So the nothing gets sublated. Everyone should learn this word. Again, it's my coffee word. So, we weren't going to do Hegel in this class, but anyway. There's the espresso pot. There's the water that you put in there. There's the coffee you put in there. And there's the fire. And then when the water boils, it gets sublated into the coffee and becomes coffee. Coffee beans, and becomes coffee. And then coffee makes sense of this entire picture. So I want, in the morning, I've already tasked other groups with this. You must try sublation as a way to talk to your partners, or to your pet, if you have one, or somebody, to your paintbrushes, if you don't have anybody laying around that you want to talk to, about sublating. Just use words like that. I sublate you. I sublate you back. Something like that. So you get a sense of how to use these words. Okay, so now, sublation is taking internally, and then it creates a dynamic, in this case coffee, which comes back around, gives meaning to these two sides. So, and the usual Marxist approach, in case you're lost here, shorthand, is the bourgeoisie. And as I was saying last night, if you go point for point, if you understand what the Tories are doing, you'll see they're trying to make the working class exactly the other side, the exact contradiction of bourgeoisie. So the proletariat is here. And then one gets sublated into the other. Basically, in this case, the proletariat gets sublated into the bourgeoisie. That creates the capitalist mode of production. Capitalist mode of production, which comes back around and gives meaning to those two sides. So I kind of come back to this one because it's easier for you to see. And then of course Marx makes an argument that one of these two sides has to leave in order for the capitalist mode of production to collapse. So he suggests the proletariat. Now, going back to Hegel, what Hegel's going to say, so that we get past this one sentence, is that you have now time or no thing, either one, and on the other side it's sublated by intuition. And that creates big intuition, well done. Okay, which comes back around and gives the base to those two sides. And now it creates this thing called big I intuition, which is then sublated by, do you remember? No. Sense certainty, well done. Sense certainty. So all of that gets into sense certainty, and that creates big sense certainty, which comes back around and gives now the ground to those two sides. One side was intuition, nothing, and now sense certainty. And now that is put against deception. Gotta buy this person a drink. Good. Perception. So that's why it's always annoying when you might say to me, or anybody that is sort of steeped in this stuff, in my opinion about this, right? My perception is blah. No. So because That's just part of the story. So all of this gets sublated into perception. Now, remembering that we started with nothing. So nothing is still at the very core, as it were, of this whole process. This all gets sublated into perception. That creates
Big perception.
big perception. Well done. You also get a drink. Oops, that's for perfection.
I'm gonna hold you guys to
That makes
everyone is everyone.
That comes-
All type of drinks.
That's right. That gets big perception, right? Then that is counterposed to what?
Understand.
Understanding. Done. Understanding. Okay. That gets sublated into understanding. So you can see that the nothing, we started over here, it's still part of understanding. Understanding becomes the big understanding, which gets sublated and creates the ground now. So if you say I understand something, what that actually means is that it's gone through these different moments of espresso coffee. So you now have this form of understanding. You almost have urban coffee. You're not there yet, but you're almost at urban coffee. Now, and then against understanding is knowledge. And that sublates everything into knowledge, and that creates big knowledge, you know, the concrete universal knowledge, which comes back around and forms the ground to the whole picture. So the absolute final straw is that knowledge is the highest form you can reach, and it also becomes the ground of its identity. Grace? Yeah? Anybody? Good, cool, everybody good? Okay, so, sorry about this crazy thing. Now, so the sentence that we were reading, is that, that basically says, it says it here, but for Hegel, being is absolute thought thinking itself. How does being come to manifest itself as absolute thought for Hegel? Since the beginning of metaphysics, being has shown itself as having the character of ground, of logos. Thus, thinking has concentrated on finding being as the ground and giving reason, ratio, in answering the question, why? Okay, so I'm not going to get into this. Well, later on, we'll get into this in a second. But Heidegger then challenges this. So now if you can get to the beginning. Oops. The other thing is that this address that he gave on identity and difference and the discussions that came out of it, people were expecting it to be an apology for him joining the Nazis or having his wife having joined the Nazi party. And he never mentioned it. He gave this talk. And so there was a huge argument because nobody knew what he was talking about. They just expected the very first words out of his mouth was, I'm really sorry, that, you know, I kind of screwed up, and, you know, I'm sorry that Husserl went to jail, and I'm sorry that I'm sort of, or Husserl was banned, you know, my teacher, you know, sorry I ratted out on him, this kind of thing, and so on and so forth. No, he just starts with these lectures. And that's actually quite interesting. Kate, what are you going to say something?
Yeah.
A breath?
I was wondering whether his whole Dasein and identity, he had to work out why he became a Nazi.
I don't think so.
No?
I think it's worse than that.
Well, so in a different, it's sort of saying that, so what he doesn't like, that's his, there's one thing that he sort of just excludes that addressing that whole issue.
Yeah.
In difference, quite tricky, but, oh no, it's not difference, the hiding with the Jews one, right?
Well, that's Leotard gets into that. No, but I mean, I don't know if one could say that that was what he was doing there. I don't think he was secretly addressing or not addressing anything. I think he was just, this is what I have to say about this particular issue. But there's been many things written about whether or not, in fact, you could read it that way. And there's a very good book by someone named Christopher Pfingst, F-Y-N-S-K, on Heidegger. And he deals with this very question. fact, I think it's called the Heideggerian Questionnaires. I forget what the book is called, but it's one of the best books on Heidegger going. Okay, so can, Mattia, do you have it in front of you?
Yeah.
Can you read?
Page 23?
No, 23. I just want you to read the very first, what?
You said 23 and you said, no, 23.
Oh, I thought you said 33. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
You just
Must have
interpret.
been you wrong.
That's right, thank you. I can't hear today. Okay, can you just read until we get to, yeah, just if you could read until we get basically down to 24. Okay, those 6 paragraphs.
The usual formulation of
Title.
the principle of identity.
Wait, title.
Sorry, the principle of identity. The usual formulation of the principle of identity reads A equals A. The principle of identity is considered the highest principle of truth.
Now, why is that?
What is one of the it's one of the things that Aristotle posed as the elements of logic.
And
So it is an element of certainty on which to build.
that's the important part.
Yeah.
It's about certainty.
Um,
Because universality implies certainty no matter where you are. It's very, very crucial to understand why the principle of identity is the highest principle of thought. So just mark that as a question mark if you haven't thought it through fully.
It's the same the starting point of Hegel. I mean that the now, although it's completely unmediated
Yeah,
and not even graspable in itself, it is certainly there.
right,
Is that correct?
yes.
It is certain that there is a now, is what I'm saying.
It is certain that there's a now. It's like the Cartesian doubt.
Mhm.
You can doubt, but you can't doubt past doubt.
Okay.
Okay,
So the usual formulation of the principle of identity reads A equals A. The principle of identity is considered the highest principle of thought. We shall try to think about this principle for a while, for we should like to find out through this principle what identity is. When thinking attempts to pursue something that has claimed his attention, it might happen that on the way it undergoes a change. It is advisable, therefore, in what follows, to pay attention to the path of thought, rather to its content than to its content.
so already he's directing you on where he's going. He's talking about a path, a process, a cartography, this equal thing that's happening. He's already got the argument. This is why we read out loud. Pedagogically, you learn how to read when you read out loud. All right, your case. Learn how to drop a pen. Okay.
To dwell properly upon the content would simply block the progress of the lecture. What does the formula A equals A state, which is customarily used to represent the principle of identity?
Wait, sorry. So just so you can see the grammatical tricks that he's doing here, the grammatical things so you could perhaps incorporate into your own work. To dwell properly upon the content would simply block the progress of the lecture. Now, that's just not true. I mean, it's true at the level if you then realize why would it block the thing, and that is because the path is really what he's going to articulate here. And so the lecture he's actually giving, which he's calling the principle of identity, is actually the principle of the path. So how do you get your name? How does that happen? The how. He's asking the how, not the why. Okay, so, sorry. Well, now he asked the how and the what. Yeah, go on.
What does the formula A equals A state, which is customarily used to represent the principle of identity? The formula expresses the equality of A and A. An equation requires at least two elements. One A is equal to another. Is this what the principle of identity is supposed to mean? Obviously not. That which is identical in Latin, idem, in Greek to, translated to means the same. Sorry, I read with the wrong emphasis. That which is identical in Latin, idem, is in Greek to auto, translated to auto means the same. If someone constantly repeats himself, for example, the plant is a plant, he speaks in a tautology. For something to be the same, one is always enough, two are not needed, as they are in the physical quality.
Did you get that part? Can you just read that one sentence again?
For
Because it's turning
something
the
to be
page.
the same, one is always enough, two are not needed, as they are in the case of equality.
Okay, so did you get that? So if you're talking about sameness, this is itself, right? Love this, I've been playing with it a lot. This, you only need one to talk about it being this itself. But if you're gonna talk about it as equal, you need two of these. Okay, so he's gonna move from there. Okay, go on.
The formula A equals A speaks of equality. It doesn't define A as the same. The common formulation of the principle of identity thus conceals precisely what the principle of identity is trying to say. A is A. That is, every A is itself the same.
So we have A going on. And that doesn't really tell you a whole lot, does it? Okay, go on.
While we are circumscribing in this fashion what is identical, we are reminded of an old word by which Plato makes the identical perceptible. A word that points back into a still ordered word. In the Dialogue of the Sophists, in 254 Plato speaks of stasis and kinesis, rest and motion. Plato asks the stranger say at this point, well, I'll spell it Greek, ukon ekaston,
Let's just say it out loud. So you can hear it.
ukon ekaston, ukon auton ekaston, toimen luin, heteron estin, auton de autot auton. Each of them is different from the other two, but itself the same for itself. Plato doesn't just say ekaston autot autot, each itself the same, but says each itself the same for itself. And the dative auto means each thing itself is returned to itself. Each itself is the same for itself with itself. Our language, like the Greek, offers the advantage of making clear with one and the same word what is identical, and again clarifying that word in the unity of all its various forms.
So what does it mean to say the dative, how do you say that word?
Dative is because in
No,
Greek,
how do you say the Greek word next to it?
eauto.
Eauto. So the dative eauto means each thing itself is returned to itself. What does that mean? What does it mean to say that each, who cares? What is it about each thing returning to itself that is essentially different than this?
It's claiming the ground.
He's claiming a ground. And what's the ground that he's claiming?
Identity.
Yes, but I mean, why is that, how do you think he's going to develop this? Why is this important? Why are we dealing with this, other than the fact that it's fun to read Greek? You know, why is he positioning it this way? Why is it Tao means each thing itself is returned to itself? Each itself is the same for itself with itself. What does this mean? It sounds like, you know, knife in the head. I mean, you know, what does it mean to say each itself is the same for itself with itself? Why is this like, and then he's like going, da-da, like why is that going like, okay, what is he saying there?
There is no
There's no not the same. Okay, that's good.
so it itself doesn't have a thesis, doesn't have an antithesis in some way.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of interesting. Do you want to, so that, yes, continue.
The itself doesn't have not itself. So
Itself doesn't have not
no,
itself.
so
It just
doesn't
has,
have just has that.
yeah. So in returning itself to itself, it's a singularity. I mean, he doesn't use the word singularity, but, right? So in returning itself to itself, this is going to become very important. So if you're confused at this level, do not feel that you can't say anything. Or just, if you don't want to say anything, but you just want to secretly say something, do something like wave a little finger or something like that, so I can tell. No fingers are moving, okay. Okay, then let's make it a little harder.
So the
Okay.
equation A equal A is folded over itself. Instead of having A equals A, we're going to taking this equation and folding it over. So we have 1A where the equal is.
So how do you repeat A? This is A.
But that's besides the point, it's not repeated.
So how does A explain itself? So we just have A, and that's it, just good, dies.
It strikes me that I never noticed before that it speaks of the dative in this paragraph.
And why is that significant for you?
Because
Yeah.
I believe in German as well, but yes, it says here, in Greek and Latin you have declination of nouns. One is the vocative word, is the first one, so if I call it mark, that's the word. Then one is the genitive, like the Saxon genitive, and it's got different designates, but it is the pen of somebody. And then the dative is the third case, where I give something to somebody else. So it is open and it has a motion towards without an object or a destination.
Right.
And in this case, it becomes very interesting, but apparently paradoxical, because the word is declining to dative is itself.
Right.
So self or identity is open and has a motion towards something.
Right.
Yet it's just open. It doesn't have.
Yes, because you have this thing that is able to have an identity which is itself, but he's saying that it can't really have an identity of itself unless itself can be repeated or folded or something. If it's giving over to something, then it has to have some kind of dynamic. So in fact, he's basically accusing Western metaphysics of, or that which started with Aristotle, as being completely wrong. Because the principle around which they've established identity, and therefore the ground, and therefore all of meaning, and therefore the whole edifice of metaphysics, is based on this little tiny problem that they've missed this whole last 2,000 years. And that problem is?
The problem is of having blocked the movement.
Block the movement.
And by putting by setting up an equation.
Right, okay, and so...
It's actually a problem that returns in modern science, in contemporary science.
Yes, and how does it do that?
It is called the Hamiltonian. Francesco might know what I do here. The idea of setting up the whole universe has an equation that should balance itself out, whether it is entropy or something else.
Do you know about this?
Sorry, I'm talking about them.
And Hamilton.
The Hamiltonian equation of entropy, where everything should balance itself out in the end, which has been accepted as the paradigm of any scientific approach until open entropies and different forms come up. But anyway.
Okay, let's move on now to get to page 25, bottom page. Who would like to read? You have to pick on people. Okay, thank you, Grace. Starting with even?
Starting with what, sorry?
With even, at the very bottom, last 2 sentences. Just for a couple, till we get the next point that he's making.
Okay. Even in the improved formula, A is A, abstract identity alone appears. Does it get that far? Does the principle of identity really the same? We interpret sameness to mean belonging together. The
No,
obvious...
Is that right?
Oh, sorry.
No,
Yeah, problem. Skip the page.
I was thinking, wait a second, that's not what we're interpreting anything.
I didn't realize that didn't make sense.
Okay, let's start again. Even the improved formula.
Even in the improved formula, A is A, abstract identity alone appears. Does it get that far? Does the principle of identity really say anything about the nature of identity? No, at least not directly. Rather, the principle already presupposes what identity means and where it belongs. How do we get any information about this presupposition? The principle of identity itself gives it to us. If we listen carefully to its keynote, if we think about that keynote instead of just thoughtlessly mouthing the formula A is A, For the proposition really says A is A. What do we
I do love Heidegger. No, you have to try and say that with a little bit more, like, you know, accepting the award, the Academy Award. So, try it again. So, the principle of identity itself gives it to us. But try that again.
The principle of identity itself gives it to us. If we listen carefully to its keynote, if we think about that keynote instead of just thoughtlessly merging the formula A is A, for the proposition really is A, what do we hear? With this is, the principle tells us how everything being is. Namely, it itself is the same with itself. The principle of identity speaks of the being of beings. As a law of thought, the principle is valid only insofar as it is a principle of being that reads, to every being as such there belongs identity, the unity with itself.
Okay, what does that mean? Why? Who cares that a self is identified with itself? Why is this when he starts saying, you know, the formula A is A, for the proposition really says A is A? What's the difference with the emphasis? A is A is A. What is he trying to say by repeating it with gusto?
Well, the ease is the equal sign, isn't it?
Yes,
In this case.
but
Tries to put
but why is this obsession with saying A is something? Why does that matter? What is the is that? Why is he saying that that is in fact going to be? Yeah, you're right. It's because it's the equal sign. Okay, so is that clear for everybody? He's emphasizing that it's the is that's going to form the ground.
Those are different kind of ease.
Right, and what's the difference between the A is A?
Because when
The A is A.
When it's flat, no, without the italics in the first instance, it is still an equality comparison. So there are actually two entities which are misnamed A and A. While if I emphasize is the relationship, and although it might sound again difficult because I'm talking about the relationship and then I'm saying it's a relation between two things that are actually one.
But that's important that you say there are two things that are actually one, because when we think of being and big being, we're not really thinking about two different things. We're thinking about two things as one.
Yes, because there is the small beings or the plural beings, which
So the ground
is the fact that they enjoy existence.
is the fact that they are both together and apart as an existence. And the apartness and the togetherness don't have the deep cut in between thing going on. So
They don't have the negation of
So- So where you have little b, big B, that's, or AA, where you have this situation and their unity is in fact a unity of separation and difference, or separation and belonging, sorry. So separation and sameness, you might want to say, where you have this happening in this example, that sort of mad, messy drawing there, the thesis antithesis, one is on one side, one is on the other side, it is always separated by the deep cut. There is always a so-called in-between that separates those two entities. What Heidegger is saying is that that which has an entity, that which is the same, that which is itself, is always multiple. It's always got a multiplicity inside of it, but they're not on either side. They're established as the ground of the thing that is the same. They're established as the ground that is the thing that is the same because of its multiplicity. Did I not make this any more clear? It looks like they're going to pass out the picture. Now,
So, if we remove the equation, the equal sign, and we put this, so 1 is 1.
yeah, for
Yeah.
example.
I wanted to say other, but then no. It's not other.
Who's Adam?
1 is other.
Oh, other,
I didn't
sorry.
want to say other, but 1 is not other. 1 is 1. Wait, I had a thought. It went away.
It went
It went away with other.
I was thinking about the little being
Yeah.
as something that takes a decision. When by reading with the complete chapter in groundless clouds.
Don't go there yet. Don't go there. We're almost there. We're almost there. That was horrible. You jumped ahead. You went from the undecidable to the decidable. Very bad. I mean, very good, but we're not there yet. We just have this one little part. I just want to push
I was
you.
just wondering about that very cool performance piece thing, because I showed you before. Like when you sort of say like A, not A, or I suppose it's like if you make between it. But then there's her performance piece. She like
Whose performance piece?
Marie Corner.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant it was. No.
She does these performances with like got pieces of paper or different things, but one of them was very sort of mathematical. But she did once, but she held them like so they matched exactly, and then very slowly she sort of peeled them apart. But that's a very different kind of. That seems to relate to this problem we're talking about.
Yes. And how? Can you explain how it does?
Well, because it's it doesn't sort of make it doesn't sort of result in the contradiction of not A and A.
Okay, we're almost there. So let's go back to this piece of paper. Now, on this piece of paper, that's sticking horrible. Okay, on this piece of paper, the excluded middle is the term that is given in metaphysics that relies on dialectics, where you have A on this side and everything that is not A that is attached to the A on the other side. So when I put it like that, because if I say this is A and everything else is not A, you all might consider yourself not A, and you're not. What's not A is just on this other side. So this is A, and all that is not A is on this side. And so wherever A goes, not A goes, and wherever A doesn't go, so on and so forth. Now, that is considered the excluded middle, so the not A can never be on the same side as A. It is a logical inconsistency. So the A on this side never finds itself on this side. So what happens in a lot of the argumentation that remains Hegelian is the famous deciding to inhabit the in-between. And so this is why, this is the Lacanian move that happens here. So this in-between that goes on, which is uninhabitable, because it is the void, it is the abyss, it is the laguna, it is the lack. There's many names for it. It's the castration, the logos, it's the whatever. It's this excluded middle, this thing called the excluded middle. And in the excluded middle, the not A can never be on the side of the A, and the A can never be on the side of the not A. And that is precisely what Heidegger is critiquing. He's doing the picture like this, and he's, rather than like this, he's doing it like this. So let's say you have Dasein, or you have big B here and little b here, that this thing forms the ground. So where you have it like this, taken together, creates the whole thing, and that whole thing is grounded then by the synthesis. With this, the ground, at least is at, because we're only talking about a partial ground, because we're not quite there on the decision. But this bit here includes A, not A. It includes being, big being. They're on the same side, as it were. They're the ground. That's the ground. The ground is this groundless ground that moves. Sorry, I should have used groundless ground in there yet, but that's where we're headed with this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Dean discussion staff.
Sorry, John, so the two elements still remain in the game.
Yes.
As they were for Hegel, but they play differently.
Yes. The game itself plays differently. No?
Yeah, no, I was
Okay.
not seeing it in a different light.
Right, okay, so now we get to, so can you continue this, what do we, oh yeah, no, can you just read that bit again, what do we hear?
What do we, the principle of identity itself gives it to us. If we listen carefully to its keynote, if we think about that keynote instead of just thoughtlessly learning the formula A is A, for the proposition really is A, what do we hear? With this is, the principle tells us how every being is namely, it is itself the same with itself. The principle of identity speaks of the being of beings. As a law of thought, the principle is valid only insofar as it is a principle of being that reads, to every being as such there belongs identity, the unity with itself.
So you see that now? So instead of having this thesis, antithesis, synthesis, this is the whole picture, what becomes the whole picture is this, except it's only one side. There is no other side. That's what's creepy about it. So to understand a groundless ground, you have to understand that there's no other side. There's no other in its name. That's what you were getting at. And that's wildly radical. To conceive of something that's singularly, that is a singular multiplicity, is what's going on here. Or a multiple singularity, depending on how you want to view it. And what's plural about it, what's multiple about it, what's bigger than one about it, is that you have being, little b, being, for example. You have the A equals A, forming this surface, as it were. And whereas before we were saying that the surface of the table, let's say, if you peeled it off, you threw it somewhere, it was no longer a surface. And then you had another surface that popped up, you peeled it off, you threw it somewhere, and another, and so on and so forth. What they're saying is that those things that you've just thrown aside as though they don't mean anything, actually those surfaces are in fact what give the ground. They don't have a structure underneath them. They're not a surface that is attached to a structure. There is no structure. There's just the surface. And it's the surface that's giving the ground. So when Wittgenstein says, don't dig down for the ground any further, remember that quote we did last week, don't go any further, you're digging in the ground. There is no further in the ground to go. There's no digging down, because it's just the surface. The surface is the ground. Can you get a sense of where we're going, where we, Martin and I, are going with this? This is very important. It's singularity here. There's no other side. There's no structure to the bottom. There's just this floating thing. Okay.
And sorry, yet it is not that being or A is solid and autonomous and self-standing. It's not
Right.
immanent.
No, it's not imminent. So, do you want me to just continue with the paragraph?
What the principle of identity has in its fundamental key states is exactly what the whole of Western European thinking has in mind, and that is, the unity of identity forms a basic characteristic in the being of beings. Everywhere, wherever and however we are related to beings of every kind, we find identity making its claim on us. If this claim were not made, beings could never appear in their being. Accordingly, there would then also not be any science. For if science could not be sure in advance of this identity of its object in each case, it could not be what it could not be what it is.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just couldn't read it.
Okay. Okay.
By this assurance, research makes certain that its work is possible. Still, the leading idea of the identity of the object is never of any palpable use to the sciences. Thus, what is successful and fruitful about the same is
No.
Page 27. Fruitful about scientific knowledge is everywhere based on something useless.
Okay, let's try that again.
Yeah, sorry.
Because it's really important to understand the relation between uselessness and nothingness. There are parallels that are going here, and I want you to miss it. So science, there's something about being useless that's very important for success. Or in the last 10 years, if you lift a rock, find some art thing going on about failure. Just like I say this very respectfully, but it's the same idea. It's the failure is more important. There's something useless that's very important here. Oh, sorry, go on. I'm try that sentence again. For if science.
For if science could not be sure in advance of this identity of its object in each case, it could not be what it is. By this assurance, research makes certain that its work is possible. Still, the leading idea of the identity of the object is never of any palpable use to the sciences. Thus, what is successful and fruitful about scientific knowledge is everywhere based on something useless. The claim of the identity of the object speaks, whether the sciences hear it or not, whether they throw it to the winds, what they have heard, or let themselves be strongly affected by it.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt there, in the sense that the way I had skipped ahead, this comment about uselessness is basically a critique of science, saying that they haven't figured out how to deal with mathematics. They're only using arithmetic mathematics, A equals A plus 1 is 2, that kind of thing. And that is what he's saying is useless. And he's not saying it's good to be useless, he's saying it's bad to be useless in this case. So I didn't want to throw you off, because later on it gets different in this particular case. Is that like self-evident for everybody? Okay. Okay, there's where we're going.
The claim of identity speaks from the being of beings. However, where the being of beings appears most early and most authentically in Western thought with Parmenides, there speaks tuatu, that which is identical in a way that is almost too powerful. One of Parmenides' fragments reads,
Trovaron to novim estin teca e.
for the same perceiving, thinking, as well as being. Different things, thinking.
So what does that mean? For the same perceiving, or for the same thinking, as well as being. For the same that we apply to perceiving, we should apply to being. What does that mean? To the same that we apply to thinking, we should apply to being. What's he getting at here? Or what's Parmenides getting at? For the same principles that you apply to the principle of thinking, you must apply to the principle of being.
If I might have, the Greek says, thinking is also being.
Yes.
Or better, in fact, the same thinking is also being, or in fact, thinking and being are the same thing.
Well, and the Cartesian move, of course, is I think, therefore I am, right? Cogito ergo sum. So, in this move, this whole what's being set up here is this fluidity of the thinking. The thinking is not this sterilized, abstract, contemplative moment. Thinking is the getting dirty of life, is the being in life, of life. So for him it's very important that you get that what he's accusing science of, wrongly so in a certain way, but anyway, what he's suggesting that science doesn't understand in this sort of straw dog thing he's doing here is that science is suggesting that there is, that the only things that are important in science is that which can be used properly or in some way, when in fact it's the useless, it's the thing that seems not to matter, in fact that doesn't have matter. That's the important aspect here. Do you think he's just talking, do you think he's just saying like very apolitical kinds of, I mean, what do you think he's doing here by saying this?
Well, is it actually, this now seems very direct criticism or attack to the abstraction of nature, or the abstraction of experience by a form of thought.
Yes, well, it's an attack on Hegel.
Yeah,
It's a very
but
profound attack
even
on
also there is the heritage, although he went very far from Husserl, the problem of the mathematization of nature that Husserl saw in Western sciences somehow echoes here.
Yes, yes. And that's also, he would, I think, be one of the first to critique speculative realism for that very reason, because of the obsession with the mathematization of nature. And it's exactly the same point that Wittgenstein attacks in his remarks on mathematics, that it's not mathematics that forms an ontology of thinking. It's if you want to go with the sciences, it's physics.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's where one understands how energies are created. Energies is the key here, not the way in which the numbers operate. Numbers don't form the ontologies. So that's what they're basically saying here.
So by saying that thinking and being are one, or thinking and existing are one thing, are the same.
Yeah.
It does away entirely with the idea of the possibility of a purity of thought,
Yes.
or a thought that is abstract and exists almost by itself.
Yes. If we go now, I want to jump to page 29. Now, he develops the argument about this belonging together thing that I've already explained. Dane, you want to just read the where it starts with "This is how things look" on page 29.
That is how things look.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
That is how things look, until we take a closer look and let the matter speak for itself.
Okay, so now he's talked about this thing about belonging and how something gets pulled together. So he's talking about, for the first 28 pages or so, he's made the argument that identity has to do with this coming together, that what we just talked about with the identity folding in on itself, the same, having this position. Okay, so now what happens?
Carry on.
Yeah, sorry.
The idea of belonging together in the sense of a belonging together arises in respect of the situation which has already been mentioned. That situation is of course difficult to keep in mind because it is so simple. But it comes closer to us just as soon as we pay heed to the following. In the interpretation of belonging together as belonging together, we, taking Parmenides' hints, already had in mind thinking as well as being, and thus what belongs to each other in the same. When we understand thinking to be the distinctive characteristic of man, we remind ourselves of a belonging together that concerns man and being. Immediately, we find ourselves grappling with the questions: what does being mean? Who or what is man? Everybody can see easily that without a sufficient answer to these questions, we lack the foundation for determining anything reliable about the belonging together of man and being. But as long as we ask our questions in this way, we are confined within the attempt to represent the together of man and being as a coordination, and to establish and explain this coordination either in terms of man or in terms of being. In this procedure, the traditional concepts of man and being constitute the toehold for the coordination of the two.
So what's he beginning to flag up as a problem? Kate, you want to take a stab at that?
No.
Anybody want to take a stab at it?
There is a hierarchy implicit in these.
Why? Why is there a hierarchy? Yes, you're right. But why?
Well, because it is either a being that would be the cause and the origin of man, or vice versa. Man seen in a very
Positivistic
light as the reason why the universe exists around humanity.
Okay.
Or at least reading it like that, or implementing it like that.
And also, in so doing, you have separate entities.
Yes.
You have this entity called the being, and you have big B being, and you have an entity called man in this case, or little b being. And they're separate slices, they exist already read. So they're sitting there and you go find them and you put them together. And he's saying that that is a problem because it's already then taking as a given the identity. Because at least it's taking the identity of the sameness of this thing, little b being and big B being. So, Dan, you want to just continue on the how would it?
How would it be if, instead of tenaciously representing merely a coordination of the two in order to produce their unity, we were for once to note whether and how a belonging to one another first of all is at stake in this together.
That's very important that you see that there's an at stake. Like I'm thinking about your marble stone and your love of the stone. That's a belonging. That kind of philiatic position toward the stone, it belongs together. Okay, so if you could think in these terms of it, so it's not separate. You don't have this like on the one hand the love of the stone, on the other hand the stone, and then just like kind of thing, right? It's actually they belong together. That's what makes sense of the whole picture. You know, otherwise they don't have any meaning to each other. So okay, no, so go on. So what is at stake in this together? Yeah.
There is even the possibility that we might catch sight of the belonging together of man and being, though only from afar, already in the traditional definitions of their essence.
So if we read this as, there's even the possibility that we might catch sight of the belonging together of Andrew and Marble, though only from afar, already in the traditional definitions of their essence. How is that so? So instead of reading the word man, can you read the word Andrew? And instead of reading the word being, can you read the word Marble? Okay?
There is even the possibility that we might catch sight of belonging together of Andrew and Marble, though only from afar, already in the traditional definitions of their essence. How so?
Going.
Man obviously.
Andrew.
Well, Andrew obviously is a being.
Obviously. That's
Better
right.
clarify.
That's right, yeah, go on.
As such, he belongs to the totality of marble, just like the stone, the tree, or the eagle. To belong here still means to be in the order of marble. But Andrew's distinctive feature lies in this, that he, as the being who thinks, is open to marble, face to face with marble. Thus Andrew remains referred to marble, and so answers to it.
That's about right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, go on. Go on.
Andrew is
No, that's not how the is.
Andrew is essentially this relationship of responding to marble, and he is only this. This only does not mean a limitation, but rather an excess. A belonging to marble prevails within Andrew, a belonging which listens to marble because it is appropriated to marble. And marble, let us think of marble according to its original meaning, as presence. Marble is present to Andrew neither incidentally nor only on rare occasions. Marble is present and abides only as it concerns Andrew through the claim it makes on him. For it is Andrew, open toward marble, who alone lets marble arrive as presence. Such becoming present needs the openness of a clearing, and by this need remains appropriated to human being. This does not at all mean that marble is posited first and only by Andrew. On the contrary, the following becomes clear. Andrew and marble are appropriated to each other. They belong to each other.
Okay, we'll stop right there. Now, so what is actually being said here, other than the fact that I think that we're beginning to understand Andrew's obsession with marble? Want to give it a go, Andre? No.
Not yet.
Okay. Okay.
Just 1 second. To gather my funds.
Hello, Anne. No, not Andrew. You're Jakob. Yes. No, that's good.
Well,
You can be Jakob. No.
No, I just it seems like this is what like you refers to. He wants to call original finitude.
Okay.
Like what he's getting.
But don't refer to something else. Let's just say, I mean, you're right, but let's just go with this. 'Cause we will open the groundless ground. We will.
Well, I just I didn't really have more to say.
I was thinking, so if Andrew is and being is marble, then the equal sign is art.
Well, the equal sign is the drawing together. Don't name it yet. The equal sign is
Okay.
just this need to be, Marble, Andrew. They're together, right? Okay.
However, I was thinking something parallel to because the example we brought up with Andrew Marble refers to art. The way I see art and the way I now understand these is that this creates the relation man-being or Andrew Marble creates a dimension.
Good.
And it helped very much putting it in the line as Andrew Marble because Andrew is not using marble to represent something.
Right.
Andrew plays with marble. And that's, I can say positive, not.
And that becomes the ground.
Yes. Whatever can be found and whatever can be done, because it's not everything that can be done, it's just something can be done with it, like any other material or technique. Then that creates a dimension which are the ground of the art making of Andrew.
How are we on this? That's the breakthrough today. Now we're going to go to the groundless ground. Okay, do you see how that creates, that it's a dimension, if not, let's try it one more time. You did very well remembering to put Andrew in there and Marble. Jakob, you want to try it with Marble and Andrew again? If we just start at the beginning, so if you just start back on page 30, and just how would it be if instead,
How would
and
it
then
be?
and if you can do Andrew and Marble.
Andrew and
Okay.
Marble. How would it be, Andrew? How would it be if instead of
Tenaciously, that's right.
tenaciously representing merely a coordination of the two in order to produce their unity, we were for once to note whether and how a belonging to one another, first of all, it is at stake.
So what's at stake in this belonging? What's at stake in this mad love affair of Andrew and Marble?
There is even the possibility that we might catch sight of belonging together, of Andrew and Marble. But only from afar, already in traditional definitions of the essence. How so? Andrew obviously is a being. As such, he belongs to the totality of Marble, just like the stone, the tree, or the eagle. To belong here still means to be in the order of Marble, but Andrew's distinctive feature lies in this, that he as the being who thinks is open to Marble, face to face with the Marble. Thus, Andrew remains referred to Marble, and so answers to it. So, sorry.
No, go on.
Is that like I might be wrong here, but I probably am. But is that like a radar kind of situation?
Radar.
Radar. Let's say because Andrew, as a thinking
Being.
small b being, as a thinking being, is open to Marble, as in he notices the Marble,
Mm-hmm.
and he creates, and there is suddenly created a belonging
Mm-hmm.
because of this noticing.
But
Is that
why did you call it radon?
radar? Like
Oh, radar. Oh, radar. So,
radar. Yeah, sorry. Like
Mm-hmm.
somehow it suddenly in the walls. I kind of imagine wall state and
Yeah.
defend against it, but at the same time you.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it radar. I think it's just that one is open
Yeah.
to it. So let's pretend this is Marble.
Mm.
Anyway. So Andrew is so that relationship that Andrew is now going to work with is not on the Marble, it's that relationship. It's going to form the going forward. It's not that Andrew goes and goes, wow, there's a piece of marble, I think I'm going to do something with it. It's rather that there's something that's going on here that creates, that they belong together, so there's this attraction. The belonging is around an attraction, it's around and also a repulsion, because obviously it's not, so attractive that Andrew gets swallowed into the marble yet. Okay, yeah? Okay, go on. This is a very different sense of what identity is. There's no, Andrew's not against marble, or he's not against anything. There's no contradiction in this. There's this, what forms the distance is something very different than a contradiction. Yeah.
So, there is, if I'm not completely wrong, for Hegel there is something that could be described as my limit is my shape. What is opposed to me is at the same time what constitutes my form, my
Right.
shape, physically or consciously. In this case, as I said, there is no opposition, it's just the fact that there is a relation going on that falls back upon both sides, so to speak, and keep them together.
Yeah.
In something that is a local relationship, because my relationship with marble might be different than the one that Andrew has. So there are
Yes.
co-present.
So the real question becomes, how is it that in Andrew and Marble's, let's say, their relation with each other, this belonging with each other, how is it that it's so strong that it can now help us when we look at something that is then produced, in this case the artwork, that one can get a sense of that dimension. So that there is this groundless ground that steers you to read something one way and not another.
Does it, when it says like, to belong here still needs to be in the order of being?
Yeah.
Could that read, to belong here still needs to be in the game of being?
Yes. Yes, and why is that important for you? Why is there a game of being? Why is saying it as a game?
Well, it's
Why does it help?
it's
It's a
really
term.
Yes, and it's because the game is where the rules get established. The rules aren't outside the game. The rules and the game are the game. The whole thing is the game. That's why it's important. And that's why Leotard goes on to form the whole, the whole book is called Just Gaming, that he has in French. I think it's in English as well.
I just thought how many times you could change a few words in this text with decision or decide.
Don't do that yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just keep-
I know you want to get to the decision, but we will, I promise. Okay.
Then what probably is tricky is calling all these a groundless ground, because it is indeed a ground. It's a ground that emerges rather than a ground that is there a priori.
Okay. Getting closer to your decision. Yeah.
Because groundless always made me think of we're precipitating in the abyss endlessly for eternity.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly doesn't.
No.
Or at least not in these terms. Because there is a logic that keeps things together,
Okay.
keeps sense together, and is the one establishing the relation between individuals, not to say men all the time, and being individuals and existence, or the more local existence and the marvel.
Yeah. Joe, can you read, starting on page 31, do you have it, so you can see it? Can you, and not use man, but use Andrew and Marble? Can you do that? And just for the next couple of paragraphs, because we're almost there, we're almost so that we can actually get to groundless grounds. Yeah, go on.
Am I starting man, obviously? Or
Yeah.
Andrew, obviously?
Andrew, obviously.
Okay.
No. Next
No.
paragraph down.
Andrew and Mom.
Okay. Andrew and Marble are appropriated to each other.
That's the first very important point. So they're appropriated to each other, not just one is appropriated to the other. They both appropriate each other.
Okay.
They both leave their ectoplasm on each other, okay? So. Sorry, Grace. I'm just so into that, I think it's great. Okay.
Andrew and Marble are appropriate to each other. They belong to each other. From this belonging to each other, which has not been thought out more closely, Andrew and Marble have first received those determinations of essence by which Andrew and Marble are grasped metaphysically in philosophy. We stubbornly misunderstand this prevailing belonging together of Marble,
Yes, of Andrew.
of Andrew and Marble, as long as we represent everything only in categories and mediations, be it with or without dialectic. Then we always find only connections that are established either in terms of Marble or in terms of Andrew, and that present the belonging together of Andrew and Marble as an intertwining.
Do you see, can you see that what's being suggested here? Well, so he says here, from this belonging to each other, which has not been thought out, which there's two ways to read which has not been thought out more closely. One is that neither Marble nor Andrew think closely, terribly closely, what is this initial thing? That's not a requirement for this belonging together. And he's also saying this type of belonging together hasn't been thought very clearly in usual forms of metaphysics. So he's making a double claim here. So he says, from this belonging to each other, which has not been thought out more closely, Andrew and Marble have first received those determinations of essence by which Andrew and Marble are grasped metaphysically in philosophy. Now, metaphysically in philosophy, what happens is that the prevailing belonging together of Andrew and Marble, as long as we represent everything only in categories and mediations, be it with or without dialectic, we find only connections that are established either in terms of Marble or in terms of Andrew, and that present their belonging together of Andrew and Marble as an intertwining. They're not intertwined. So if they're not intertwined, what are they? How do they belong? They don't like mold together and become this homogeneous blob. How do they end up belonging together? Heidegger continues, we do not as yet enter the domain of belonging. So far, if you keep thinking of this as an intertwining or something like that, you're not going to understand the belonging. Something else going on. And did anybody actually read further on this so you know what's going on? Okay, what goes on?
But it's the old proposal of the leaping out of the picture of the water separated.
Right, so what is this leap that Andrew now has to deal with?
He's letting go of his position as the artist, the author, in control of the marble, and being open to it.
Yes.
And being
So what Andrew must do is to leap out of. He needs to learn how to let. You need to learn how to let go. Okay, okay. It's tough. You have to leap out and just be present. And suddenly we're in Buddhism. This is very Buddhist. What's going on here? You must be present to the thing. Did anybody ever meditate? Did anybody meditate here? I mean, serious meditation. You know, where you empty your mind and you become completely present. And in the meditation, when one meditates, which I recommend everybody doing, if you have time, or you should make time, you let things enter your mind or your being, like the sounds in this room. Like we just sat for a second and just listened. What would you hear? And don't name the things you're hearing. Don't name like there are students walking outside or there are artists saying something. Just hear. It's that you're not naming, you're just feeling it. You're just, and even feeling already directs the thinking in a way that is already showing a direction. I'm trying to do that. In this moment, the belonging is completely undecidable. So that's why I wanted to prevent you on the decidable thing. The meditation, you're not making a decision, you're just there, or here, in fact, here and there. You just. One of the reasons I really love this room, actually, is that I've sat in here very quietly, just like this. And it's beautiful. Just, I find it very, very beautiful. Okay, so we do not as yet enter the domain of belonging together. If you keep thinking that those noises that we were hearing are intertwining, and you're going, that's a voice. Oh, I think I know who that is. Or that one, you know, still owes me 5p, and that one, you know, that's not what you have to do. You have to spring out of that. And to spring out of that is something that is very hard to do. And rational being usually can't do it. And he's saying that the problem is that mainly he's using Hegel, but dialectically or otherwise, if you must maintain this presence of yourself, you're not going to get to how belonging actually constitutes the field, the groundless ground. So, Jakob, you want to continue with where does the spring go? So, end of 30, at the bottom of 32. Sorry. I'm sorry. I missed that bit. We do not yet, as yet.
We do not as yet enter the domain of belonging together. How can such an entry come about? By our moving away from the attitude of representational thinking, this move is a leap, in the sense of a spring. The spring leaps away from the habitual idea of man as the rational animal, who in the modern times has become a subject for his objects.
Simultaneously. No, it's hard to read out loud.
Simultaneously.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just
No, you're
always
good, you're good.
longer words and pronunciation doesn't go right. I need to practice things like that.
Oh, good. So they're helping you.
Spontaneously, the spring also leaps away from marble. But marble, since the beginning of Western thought, has been interpreted as the ground in which every being, as such, is grounded.
Great. We do not yet enter the domain of belonging together. How do we do it? We do it by moving away from this attitude of representational thinking. What is representational thinking? Why is this such the, bad boogeyman? Why is this always pictured as the bad thing? What is the thing he's calling representational thinking? It's the thinking that ends up showing there's thesis on the one hand, antithesis on the other. That is to say that there's a rational positionality that one then enters and deals with. You must jump away from that. But if you jump too far away from that, you're not going to be able to have any sort of a rigor to your work. And even though we don't know what this relationship is between Andrew and marble, there is one, and that gives you your first form of rigor, your first form of rigorous thinking. But what is rigorous thinking? It's thinking that can actually hear. That's the thinking that actually can, as Kierkegaard would put it, is attuned. It's thinking that becomes attuned. It doesn't see things in these separate categories that you then stitch together.
It's when we were reading the first chapter of this book, Levi was bringing up the issue of picturing thinking as something that should get rid of all the extra superficial noise to get to the thing itself,
Yes.
to be a pure understanding. And instead here is starting with a continuum, it's all cut in at once.
Yes. This is the very basis of Deleuzian moves, it's the basis of Foucauldian moves, this is the basis of Lyotard, it's the basis of most of them. This, right here. That's why Identity and Difference is probably one of the most, if not the most important text to get under your belt. Not Being in Time, or it's called, this one, because it is trying to get you to think about how does something form the moment around which you figure out how to go forward. What gives you that ground? And it's got to be a ground that can't represent. If it represents, it's not going to be a ground. It's going to be a model, no matter what Hegel says. Hegel says a model is an abstraction, and an abstraction is something that can't be universally complete. Hegel, can universally complete something. It's not a model. And Heidegger is saying, no, sorry, it's still a model. It's still a model even if you complete it universally, because you are not understanding how to actually talk about belonging. You're already talking about belonging as this deep cut. So, where does the spring go that springs away? Okay, whoops, sorry. Simultaneously, the spring also leaps away from being. So, if you're going to get out of this rational thinking, as it were, representational thinking, if you're going to be able to leap away and actually be attuned, and therefore have this very different belonging, this very different identity that's going on, you end up leaping or away from the whole thing while at the same time being part of the whole thing. So the leap isn't like you're going off somewhere and you're now flying around like Peter Pan. Simultaneously, the spring, so you've sprung away, and in your springing away, you spring away from the whole thing. So here you are. So in order to, Okay, so in order to have this relationship, Andrew and Marble, in order to have it as he's talking about it, it must look in this relationship that it's being brought together by being open. But to be fully open, you must leap out of the picture that even that presents. You must leap out of the whole thing and just be as completely open as you can be. And to be completely open, okay, so that's the picture we've drawn, but that's still a representational picture. To leap away is to then allow you to stop also making a picture out of being, big B being, making a picture out of little b being Andrew, and completely come away from it, and then you can understand that yes, you go into an abyss, but it's not really an abyss, it just, and that's where those equal, that it's the belonging, that's where the belonging is here. That's what he's talking about. So where does the spring go that springs away from the ground into an abyss? Yes, as long as we only represent the spring in a horizontal of metaphysical thinking, but no, insofar as we spring and let go. Where do you let go? Well, in the Buddhist moment, you let go and you're just here. So you're in the present. You can never be in the present in metaphysics. Here you are in the present, but you're not stuck in the present. You're not always here, 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 here. Where to go? To where we have already, to where we already have access, the belonging to being.
This is where it's irritating because it's really dispossession.
Sorry, I know. This is where the sort of the political starts coming in. But just so we get the whole argument, is that okay for you? One of your hairs comes out. Okay. Being itself, however, belongs to us, for only with us can being be present as being, that is, become present. Are we okay, or does that need to be explained further? I can explain that further. So, the leaping away happens, but obviously you're not floating off into, you know, somewhere to nothingness. You're actually now able to make sense of it in relationship to the thing that is now sitting there open. Because even in meditation, it's not, maybe making sense is too strong. You're neither making sense, but you're not making sense. You're just there. And to be there means you have to have this relationship between the whole picture and the little pictures without naming, just letting it come in. Thus, a spring is needed in order to experience authentically the belonging together of Andrew and Marble. This spring is the abruptness of the unbridged entry into that belonging, which alone can grant a toward each other of Andrew and Marble, and thus the constellation of the two. The spring is the abrupt entry into the realm from which Andrew and Marble have already reached each other in their active nature, since both are mutually appropriated, extended as a gift, one to the other. Only the entry into the realm of this mutual appropriation determines and defines the experience of thinking. What a curious leap, presumably yielding us the insight that we do not reside sufficiently as yet where in the reality we already are. Where are we? In what constellation of being and man? Now, let's just turn to groundless grass. I want to show you how this connects before we get to the bloody meeting. Sorry, meeting. If we now get to, we were looking at what is called thinking, right? Well, we're
Yes.
gonna be, yeah.
No.
No.
No?
Groundless ground, chapter 5.
Chapter 5, yeah, okay. We did what, yeah, the essence of ground. That's really sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Must get out more. Okay. Okay. Now, can you read the remarks on mathematics? Oh, no.
Sorry, can somebody else?
Can you
Mine
read?
is gonna load.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can you read, Andrew, can you read the,
I'm not fairly.
you don't have it?
Oh,
Who has
the
it here?
difficult thing.
Okay, okay.
The
It's
difficult-
chapter 5,
Chapter 5, the quotes from Peter Stan.
the essence of ground.
The difficult thing here is not to dig down to the ground. No, it is to recognize the ground that lies before us as the ground. For the ground keeps on giving us the illusionary image of greater depth. Sorry. And when we seek to reach this, we keep on finding ourselves on the old level. Our disease is one of wanting to explain.
Now, given the fact we've just spent the last hour and a half, 2 hours on that one little text, can anybody begin to link that to this opening remark, this opening salvo by Wittgenstein? The difficult thing here is not to dig down to the ground. That is not the problem. No, it is to recognize the belonging that lies before us as actually the ground. For in the old version, in the metaphysics version of the ground, that ground keeps on giving us the illusory image of a greater depth. And when we seek to reach this, we keep on finding ourselves at the old level, or on the old level. Our disease is one of wanting to explain, when in fact, one has to learn how to be open to the possibilities. Being is intrinsically ground-like, so it feels like it's giving ground. What gives ground presences as ground has the character of a ground. Precisely because it is ground-like, ground-giving, it cannot need a ground. The ground-like is groundless. What grounds, what presences as basis does not need the ground. That is, it is without something to which it could go back as something outside of it. There is no longer any back, no behind itself. It's just pure presencing. Okay, so now if we just, I feel stressed. So close to the end of the hour. But if we can just go a little bit further so we can, yeah. Okay. If you go to page 184, where he's talking about reason, it's in this context that Braver starts to try and show how the two, Wittgenstein coming in one direction and Heidegger on the other, begin to get rid of a very, what Braver thinks is, and so do these guys, is a stale notion of reason. It's not that one can go without reason. This whole book is a book on reason. It's all reasoning. It's all logically putting something forward. But the logic is embracing this very first move, this very first form of belonging. Now, we've only done 33 pages, if I did any difference. And it's that complex a text that we haven't even gotten to the really crucial bit. We've gotten only to the partial crucial bit. The really crucial bit, or the partial crucial bit, is this fact of the belonging that you now, I think, hopefully have a sense that belonging is what forms the ground. But it's only a partial fingerprint of this ground. Because it requires, this dimension that is being established requires another element to make the picture, as it were, complete, or to always have an incomplete groundless ground, an incomplete ground, an incomplete picture. And that is the question of difference, which we don't have time to do at the moment. It's just we have 4 minutes to go. So, I'm sorry about that. I think what might be helpful is not so much this one, is to go back to chapter 4, actually. I mean, this chapter is quite good on the way in which the ground gets established. But I think chapter 4, maybe just, if you go back to what is called thinking, so you get, because in this he starts talking about how like spatialities, distances, and so on, start creating difference, which is different than negation. Any questions so far? Was it anything?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Films of Greta Garbo, Nikita, you know this one? Camille,
Yes?
Queen Christiana?
Yes?
Yes.
That's your question?
That's my
That's a great question. I understand that question. Mark and I belong. Yes, it's true. Okay, so, right, next week, I'm going to be in Spain. I know, I'm even jealous I'm going. God, it's fantastic. Anyway, but Jo is going to be here, Jo Longhurst. She she's, well, you've met her before, and she's very brilliant, as you know, and also is going to be doing some of this braver stuff. But what she wants to also do is ask how you're doing this belonging in relationship to your practice. And I know that you may think, oh, well, I'm not going to come this week, you know, or next week. But I think it's worth your time if you can do it, because she is fantastic. So do it. I know you're not going to be able to make it next week, right? But are there other people that are going to, that know they can't be there next week? Yeah, you can't be there, you can't be there, you can't be there. It'll be a small group, a small but hearty group of people who will be there. Okay, great. See ya.